So in this lesson, we're going to talk about shooting video with your smartphone. Now I have an iPhone and some of you may have other phones, but I'm just going to kind of go over the basics so we can get into it. So first let's talk about settings. Here I'm going to go into my settings and we're going to look for the camera part. Depending on your phone, you have different options for resolution. You can do, on this phone, 720 at 30 frames per second, 1080 at 30, 1080 at 30, and you can also do 4K at 30 frames per second. The default best for iPhones is usually 1080p HD at 30 frames per second. That's going to get your standard best video. On this phone, it will do slow motion and we can have 1080 at 120 frames per second or 720 at 240 frames per second. 1080 is the typical resolution for your standard 1920 by 1080 TV in your living room, typically. So we're going to leave it at 240 frames per second for slow-mo because I like that slow-mo, and we're going to leave the 1080 at 30 frames per second for the normal video shooting. So let's go back to our camera, and we got Phil here doing some woodwork for us. We're going to swipe over to video. So now we're in video mode on our smartphone and we're looking at Phil. The main thing with video for me is to make sure that your phone is horizontal, because when you end up exporting this or you show it on YouTube, you want to get the full range and the full sensor of your phone. If you're vertical, which a lot of people tend to do because you hold your phone that way, it's just going to be a little sliver of video and it's going to be really hard to show that on full screen. So let's see, we have Phil here. Automatically the phone is going to try and adjust to his face. You can see that it's trying to look for a face, and for this phone it's very much trying to focus on that. Most smartphones are all going to be autofocus. There are a few where you can adjust it, but generally because of the small lens, it's going to do it itself. So let's go ahead and record video. And you can see I'm really kind of just using my ideas of rule of thirds and composing a nice shot, and I'm trying to hold it as steady as possible. Because it's such a small iPhone, you can see there's a little bit of shake, and you're just going to have to kind of get used to that. And just like the focus, you're just going to have to kind of get used to practicing it and making sure that you can kind of hold it steady. Another great thing with the phones is you can see how it's exposing automatically. This phone's doing it pretty subtly. When you turn out here, you can see how it just exposed greatly for the tons of sun. We're in a garage right now, and when I come back into the shade, it does it automatically. For this phone also, I can tap on a position and I can move the exposure up and down. You can see the little sun going up, and that's making it brighter, blowing Phil out and blowing the sun out, and then as I come down manually, it's getting darker and darker. And that may be, sometimes you need to fight with the smartphone itself because it's trying to expose it automatically. But here I've exposed a little bit lower. It looks a little bit nicer. The shadows are a little deeper and the black's a little darker. It's a little more dramatic. So here's another thing for smartphones, focusing. It likes to do autofocus typically, but here if you tap in a certain area, it will focus itself. I'm going to get really close to this wood block, and you can see I'm tapping here, and it's focusing directly on the wood block as opposed to Phil's face. If we tap on Phil's face, it should focus slowly on Phil's face. Again, this depends on the model of phone you have. This is an iPhone 7, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job of that. So let's try slow-mo. The big thing about slow-mo is shifting over to it. Here, now we're in slow-mo, and you can't really tell right now because we have a lot of light coming in, but when you shift into slow-mo, you're going to lose a lot of light. What it's doing internally is it's shooting more frames per second, which means there's frames that are in front of the camera for less amount of time, which means the light's going to hit those less. Phil's going to start to sand this little piece of thing really, really fast as soon as we start shooting, and we'll see what slow-mo ends up looking like. So checking out this clip, it's really cool. This is 240 frames per second, and it's actually at 720. It's not at 1080. Shooting something that has a lot of motion will look a lot better when you're shooting slow motion. It'll actually show the effect more. Keep in mind, if you're shooting yourself for a vlog or for instruction, you can always do selfies with your video camera on your smartphone. So remember, there's that little button in the upper right corner. Now we see me, and I'm looking into the camera. It's nice. Remember, keeping our rules in mind, but also paying attention to what's behind you and also making sure that your finger doesn't cover the camera. So right now I have a lot of white light coming in. It's lots of soft light from a garage door. If we spin around, we can see our crew back there. There's Phil and Sam. The same rules apply with the tapping. We can tap to expose over here, and we can kind of manually tap, as well as focusing. You can focus on me and the exposure, or I can focus on these guys back here by tapping. So a couple of pro tips for recording yourself on your own smartphone is, one, looking into the camera on your phone. It's much better and engages the audience as opposed to looking at yourself. Another one is keeping the camera at eye level, keeping yourself centered, and finally, if you want to show some stuff, framing up to see your friends in chat. There's also lots of different things that you can get for your smartphone. You can get tripods, you can get stabilizers. You really can set it down anywhere. It really is a camera that you're carrying with you in your pocket all the time.